the store, wasn't it?
81.
So it was, right.
Yeah.
So 89 was the year I opened the store. Was Hardshot the first one?
No, the first Western was in 81.
Okay, but was
came
Hardshot?
around 91.
Aha. Okay, so I have actually read all the way through in real time.
Yeah, all the Posadas books.
All the Posadas books, and so it's been a real treat to be able to move from being a reader to actually editing Steve's books. Not that I probably would have clashed with you over the early ones, but it's been fun to have discussions as we've gone along now all these years.
Yep. Yes.
What could you say, right? Right. So, Easy Errors. What was the genesis of your story? Because you usually start with some kind of fascinating incident, and usually bloody.
Yeah, Easy Errors was actually a request.
Okay.
The book was. And it follows the first prequel, which was One Perfect Shot.
Right.
And that was a request as well from a reader that wanted to know what happened, the day when Estelle was actually hired.
Mm-hmm.
And you may remember I called you or emailed you and said, "Can I do a prequel?" And you said, "Well, of course, duh." So anyway, when that came out, then the very same reader, two of them, said, "What about the day that Bobby was hired?" And by then I already knew I could do it, so I didn't have to ask. And that's how that came to be. And the problem, for those of you that follow plots, is by the time I wrote Easy Errors, which is just last year, Bobby Torres had been working in Posadas County since 91. He was in the very first book as a young deputy. And he's now 45 or 50 or more. And so the Bob Torres in Easy Errors has to be the same person, even though he's only 22 or 23 in Easy Errors. And that I discovered was not as easy as I may have thought it was back when I started doing prequels.
Well, when you say the same person, surely, the passage of time has changed him in some respects.
Sure.
So what fundamentals are we, you can't change the way he looks or his hair color and all that. Well, he could go gray.
Yeah, that's not going to change.
Right.
His taciturnness, is there such a word?
Yeah.
His short-windedness is probably actually more developed than it was when he was younger, but he doesn't have much to say in Easy Errors. He's just not a blabby guy. I'm having a lot of fun with that as it goes along, because I've discovered that the department photographer, Linda Real, loves to give him a hard time, in part because of the kind of guy he is. So she's always digging him, and he good-naturedly puts up with it. He doesn't talk anymore, but he can be kidded.
But you've always had a somewhat fluid concept, because some books back you wrote a book that was not in the whole chronological. I keep wanting to call it the one with chili in the title, isn't it? Red and Green, or...
Oh, Red, Green, or Murder.
Right.
Yeah, Red, Green, or Murder came out because Worldwide Paperbacks was doing an anthology called Deadly Morsels, about murder by food. And they called me and said, "Would you be interested in doing a novella for this collection of 4 novellas?" And so I did, and in retrospect, I don't think the novella was as successfully crafted as it could have been. I didn't know anything about novellas, I just wrote the dang thing. Anyway, they liked it, so but then I asked you, I think this story would expand easily into a novel and repair some of the damage that was done because I tried to force it into a novella. Yeah. And so that's how Red, Green, or Murder came out. And the interesting thing is, that's essentially, for those of you who are interested in the publishing business, that's how I came to leave St. Martin's Press, New York, become the Poison Pen. Because I had just written, not long before that, I had written the first one in my medical series called Race for the Dying. St. Martin's had published it. And I was ready to start the next one, but I was doing Red, Green, or Murder. And they had already said, yeah, let's do that. And I said, there's a catch. Would you please sell the paperback rights when you get to that point to Poison Pen? And they said, well, we don't do that sort of thing. You don't? They said, our paperback guy will sell it wherever. And I said, essentially, well, listen, I've done 16 books with you, and this is the only instance when I'm asking you to do this, because if they do the paperback, it'll be available pretty much forever, because it's print on demand or whatever. However that works, it'll always be available. If you sell the rights to worldwide in Canada, it'll be like all their stuff. They'll print one big press run to satisfy the Mystery Club. That's it. I said it's a very rural, regional mystery. Murder by, looks like it might be green chili, but it turns out it isn't. Well, no, we just can't do that. I said, well, then this satisfies the next book option in the contract then, doesn't it? Well, I guess. And if you've ever wondered why Race for the Dying came out with St. Martin's Press, but it comes to time for burning, came out with Poison Pen, excuse me, that's why. Because you told them, see you around.
Well, there was a long-standing view in New York that places like New Mexico and Alaska didn't actually count. Dana went through that forever with Alaska. Boy, did they miss that one. I mean, that was way before, the biggest catch and all the rest of it. Now Alaska is one of the hottest places ever, but they dismissed her as regional, which is why she's no longer there either. But, New York has a very sort of New York-centric view, and it's often difficult for them to see. The whole publishing has really become global, and so all kinds of things now are happening that were not true 20 years ago. You're getting books from all different countries, and so you also get them from different regions in the United States. So there we are. But anyway, my point was, by the way, the reason it's called Red and Green Murder, are all of you familiar with Santa Fe's chili? So you know that it's red, green, or Christmas, right? Mm-hmm. Right. Okay. Which is part of the point of the title.
I'm
but
not familiar.
You're not familiar, right? You have ordered a Christmas burrito every time we ever go to Santa Fe. Yes. I think that long series are actually more fun when the chronology does not relentlessly move forward. That there's lots of times when it's interesting to go back and explore other aspects of characters. So, I like the fact that you've been doing that. Now, the book that you and I are currently working on to come out next year is moving forward.
Yep, that's going on. I've had a lot of, it's fun hearing from readers, first of all. I wish more readers would write, but the ones that do have a pretty good impact. And there's a whole gang of readers who really like the part of the story about Francisco and his music and his little brother Carlos. And I hear that a lot, What are they doing now? Well, they're both running drugs out of Chiapas. But I thought, well, it's time to move on a little bit with them to get their career established and working. And in the one I'm doing now, Francisco is 25.
Next year, not this book.
Yeah. Carlos is 21. Okay.
At Stanford.
Yeah, at Stanford.
Not influenced by your editor.
Right.
It was a happy choice.
In architecture school.
Right.
And Estelle is 50. And she's starting to have those thoughts that creep up on people when they get to that point. She's been with the Sheriff's Department now for more than 25 years. then she hurts in a couple places. You can't shoot somebody and have them, not hurt. And if you remember Final Payment, she really got zapped in Final Payment pretty hard. And that's coming back to haunt her.
And her mother, who lived to a robust 103,
yeah, she's
has
dead.
been the stalwart of the series, but finally at 103.
But Estelle still talks to her empty rocking chair and realizes, I better stop this.
I really liked Teresa. I thought she was a wonderful character.
Yeah.
But, at some point,
there
you're
comes
right.
a point. So anyway, the challenge that's facing her is what to do with her life, and she realizes what kind of a career her son now has. It's just incredible. He is the chief. The word is not chief pianist.
Principal?
He is the what?
Principal?
That's the word. Thank you.
Mm-hmm.
He is the principal pianist for a 5-week Beethoven festival in Munich, where they're playing not only most of Beethoven's work, including all his insanely difficult piano sonatas, but they're also playing a lot of work that some of Beethoven's friends, acquaintances, so on, wrote, which he cheerfully tells his mother some of it's pretty bad. The audience laughs in all the wrong places. But anyway, he decides to visit for Christmas because he has some rather large news to break to his mother that he wants to do in person. And he calls her up the day before he's going to arrive. He'll be arriving tomorrow. He's discovered Viajet, which is, you rent a Grumman Gulfstream 4 or whatever. So he flies from Munich to Stanford to pick up brother and brother's girlfriend, whose mom also doesn't know about, who's half Somali and half Irish. And
Even I don't know that because you haven't got that in the pages
that's
I've read.
right.
Stop
I
right
didn't give you
now.
the pages.
That's next year's book. Don't you dare say
Anyway,
anymore.
they fly into Posadas.
Right, and that's where the page is in.
Yep.
So we'll stop with that one. Let's get back to easy yours. Right. So
What's he got to tell?
Stop.
that was the book he's writing. That was not this book.
I understand.
He's
You
been here for a while.
want to know how it ends? I want to hear.
I don't want to know how
It's
it
like
ends till he's
audiobooks.
written it. I'll be all upset.
Okay.
All right, so easy yours. You've had very dramatic. You usually have very dramatic openers for your books. Way back in Heartshot, we had this terrifying ride in the airplane, and you've had at least one perfectly horrendous car crash. So what happens to open up easy yours? Because it's another of these tragedies.
How does it open? This reminds me of. This is a related story. Don't give up.
Okay.
Many, many, many years ago, when my older brother was a senior in high school, he had to do a senior research paper, and he decided to do his on William Somerset Maugham. And he wrote Maugham a letter saying, "Do you still feel the same way that you did when you wrote Of Human Bondage?" And lo and behold, he got back a nice typed letter from William Somerset Maugham somewhere in downtown France where he is living. And Maugham said, "Well, the last time I read Of Human Bondage was in 1919 when I had read the proofs. So I really don't remember the book, but I suppose I haven't changed all that much." This reminds me of not a Maugham, but I'm trying to remember how the year started because I moved on to another book, and that's not in my memory file. But I've deleted that. How does Easier start anyway?
Anybody have a book? We have a car. We have a terrible car crash once again. It's come down the access road to the interstate.
Yeah. I've got the memory file now.
Okay, good. And so
A temporary delete.
they go to this horrific scene, and
Yep.
then they realize that there's way more to it than some kid just
Yep.
drunk skating off the interstate.
Yeah. And part of that, it comes from little memories, little incidences here and there. It takes place about 1986 or so on, which is the old years of the old boxy Suburbans, not the streamlined ones,
Right.
real square. And if you've ever seen one of those leave the highway and come apart at high speed, it's just absolutely amazing. And I've been there, done that, and so I had that image in my head, and I had the image of, because Posadas County is all an invention, you have to understand, so I know exactly where the exit ramp coming off the interstate is, and the problems they've had. And the thought occurred to me that it would be neat to have a related homicide that wasn't in the car. And so how do you do that? And then going back to the memory as a high school teacher for years and years, May and June were always terrible months in some ways. To be a teacher, because we always wondered which one of the class of whatever was going to end up against a telephone pole or not be in class the next day. It just happens, especially when kids drink. And I've known some places like in Easy Airs where they were carousing and shooting at a water tank that belongs to a rancher. If you stop and think about that for a minute, with 3 or 4 drunk teenagers using a heavy gauge steel water tank that's full of water as a target.
Wow,
It's
one
just,
might get a ricochet. What do you think?
oh my. Or right next to it is the windmill and the spinning blades, especially with some of the spin added to with alcohol, is also a fascinating issue. And then you throw in 3 adult hunters who should know better, and that adds to it. And that, by the way, came from I rode opening day with Conservation Officer Don Price down in Belen, opening day of deer season. And guess what percentage of the hunters we talked to that opening day were in violation in one way or another?
Probably 80.
All of them.
100.
100.
Everyone.
Really?
Yeah. The morning started with 4 guys standing against their pickup trucks with their loaded guns, leaning against the pickup truck on a public highway whilst they started their beer day. Whoa. And it went from there. And I thought, well, this is kind of neat. What are the
Only a crime novelist would say, oh, look, this is kind of neat.
Well, you know, it happens. You can't make it not happen. So I thought, okay, you got 4 teenage kids who should know better, but obviously don't, mixed with 3 adults who have all enormous egos and should know better and do know better. So that all mixes together, and that's where the plot comes from.
Right. Well, you had an earlier book where there was a terrible crash, and part of the I still remember that one. You remember? It's awful. But then, you know, part of the question is who was really in the car, who was really driving, and was there more to it? And so this one is the same when the SUV comes screaming off the road. Obviously, it was. First assumptions don't turn out to be true. So I like the way that Steve does that. He always just sort of leads you along. You know, and I'm not necessarily a person fascinated with procedure and how things work, and you are a person who is totally enthralled with procedure and how things work. But you tell it in such a way that it's interesting to follow it. Do you have that? Those of you who are fans have that reaction? I always like just going along, you know, seeing how it's going to develop. And then you're really very good at surprises at the end. You know, we always think we know what's happening. And if it's such a small community, it's really hard to do that.
Yeah.
You don't have an enormous cast to work with. Although, fortunately, with the interstate there, and now that you've created Night Zone, there's a whole lot more. So we're away from Cabot's Cove, New Mexico, and we're doing
is.
more influx of people to make it more realistic.
Yeah, as you as you turn up the society screws of a little community, no matter how wonderful it is to bring something in, like Night Zone and all the employees,
Right.
all the money and all of that, it has a profound effect on the community because, first of all, nobody really likes you if you're rich because you're rich and they're not. And it's been my experience in the newspaper business doing some stories about things like this. They may accept largesse from you and help and community stuff, but they really hate you for it, in the long run. So Miles Waddell, the guy who set up Night Zone, and that was his dream, he inherited $1/3 billion, and he's always wanted to do it. He doesn't happen to want to, help hungry kids in Kenya. He wants this, and so he does it. And there are lots of people who don't want him to do that. There's always scavengers around who want your money.
Well, but the thing is, you have to have a lot of community infrastructure if you're going to start bringing in tourists. There was a big article, I think it was in the Wall Street Journal the other day, about the town in North Dakota, I think, the fracking town, that, all these people descended on it for the, I think it's fracking, not shale. Do I have that right? Fracking. And the town was like just a few hundred people, and now it's 30-some thousand people. And so, thinking that the oil money would keep going, they built a lot of infrastructure so these people could live there. And now the oil's drying up, and now they have this enormous debt. And how are they going to pay for, the swimming pool and the community center and all these other things? But it's really true. If you take a little community like La Posada, or not like, like Posadas, and then you suddenly create this influx. And you did it in part. You did the theme park in part because you didn't have a train. You wanted a train of your own in Posadas. We had that conversation. You had every other form of transportation, but so far, no railroad.
Writers make I cheerfully admit, writers make lots of mistakes. When I was designing Posadas County, I drew a map and the whole business, the interstate. I never actually call it Interstate 10, but it's an interstate. I forgot the railroad. And how many trains go through Lordsburg every day, every 20 minutes? And the tragedy of that is, think of all the various plots you can do with locomotives.
Or just people on trains.
Or
freight falling off trains, or however you want to look at it.
However you want to do it. Things falling off of trains. And I'd never actually had a good way to correct that. So.
However, I have noticed that in the manuscript of the book we've been discussing more than the current book, for whatever reason, you are expanding the airport. So, well, if Francisco was going to come zooming in on his version of NetJet in his Gulfstream, where is he going to land in Posada, with this little dirt runway here? And also, suddenly the airport is coming to life in Posadas. I know, and I laughed when I read it. I knew when I read it that somebody was going to be riding in on a Gulfstream. I just hadn't gotten there yet. But,
Yep.
Right. So you're upping the infrastructure yourself, in order to do various things. If Francisco's going to be on a world tour and come home, he's probably going to do it on a private jet because it's not that easy to get to. Posadas otherwise. It would take him forever. He'd be changing planes in, Albuquerque and New York and the whole bit. So one thing leads to another.
Yeah. Plus, bringing his brother with him.
Right. So now we're going to have a bigger airport as well as a railroad, and we still have Interstate 10, which hasn't gone away.
Yep.
Right.
Yep.
So all by yourself, you're building up the county.
Yep.
And then what'll really get you is that there's a description in Real, the little tiny village, and you look across to Tres Santos, the town 6 miles south in Mexico, and there's the little strands of barbed wire, and now there's a little sort of a hut. That they stop people, but what if there actually becomes a wall? You're going to have a whole new world to deal with. Or you could just have it never come to this area.
I can just ignore it.
That's right. There's the walls.
It's a beautiful.
Like wolves. Really could. That's
I was thinking of that when I was reading that. Aha,
Yep.
right.
What are you going to do when it comes time to think of a port?
Probably even Steve is not going to be able to bring steamships and oil tankers to Posadas. It's just not happening. Right?
Up from Elephant Butte. There you go.
The elevation in the Cristobal's is over 8,000 feet, so I don't think water's going to flow uphill. No, but it's just been sort of fun to to watch it develop and for the lives of your characters to move on, and age and so forth, and you have to bring in new people, But it's also fun to go back to the beginning and see where they were. Are we ever going to get a book where we find out Gaster's first day on the job?
Well, that's sort of a logical
A prequel to this prequel to the sequel.
Yeah,
Right.
he would be, let's see, he was hired when he was 40, because he had been 20 in the Marines and 20 out, so.
You'd
Yeah,
really be back. That would be a
he'd
true
be 40.
historical novel when you go back to
He
Gaster.
would be a different character. And there again, it would be a challenge to make him the same person, only younger.
Yeah.
Which would be kind of interesting. But that's not right away in the pipeline. I really, after I finish the one I'm doing now, I want to do the third medical history one. Don't groan.
I didn't say a word. I just tried not to flinch.
Yeah.
Right?
We're good. Dr. Parks is having some issues, so I need to visit those. I also keep having this real desire to go back and write another Western. I started out writing Westerns, and then, all the Westerns died off. They didn't sell very well. And my then agent said, Westerns aren't selling. What else can you do? And
You mean the Zane Grey kind of a Western?
Well, I never liked those. So I like more realistic Westerns. Zane
Are
Grey.
these Westerns where people die, or are these Westerns where they're moving cattle?
Yes. what I don't like about most Westerns, I'll pick on Louis because he's so pickable. Louis L'Amour, all the characters are broad-shouldered and flinty-eyed and never miss. They're not deaf after shooting so much. And with this horribly stilted language that he imagined people in 1890 used.
The truth is they spoke way better than we do.
They what?
They spoke better than we do.
Yeah.
If you read Victorian, even
Yeah.
the poor kids in the streets in Victorian novels speak better English than almost anyone today.
Yep. Yeah, I was looking at the misspelling on the vans driving around town today. The companies, the wrong "it's" on the van. Anyway, I got some nifty ideas that I'd like to put into a Western again. I don't know when that's going to get done, because the medical story will take quite a bit of energy and effort to do.
Well, for every book you write, there's at least one book you're not writing.
At least.
So you just have to think about it that way.
That's right. That's right.
So, anything else you'd like to say about Easy Herbs? Since you can't remember it clearly.
No, I remember it now.
Maybe you need to read it.
I think it's a sort of an axiom from law enforcement observations that people simply don't realize how easy it is once they start on the slippery slope, which we talked about before.
Right.
It's much more common that people continue down the slippery slope to disaster than it is correcting themselves and taking a step back. That's how most of these things happen, and that to me is kind of a fascinating theme, how people behave and what decisions they make.
It does tend to be small steps in
Yeah.
your books rather than, some catastrophic major decision.
Yeah, and most of them are good people, and good in quotation marks maybe. I don't want to waste any print on international terrorists. I don't care about them. And so I don't plan ever to give them any press time, period. I don't really care about the manufactured problem of illegal aliens. So other than once in a while, one is mentioned, that you'll never see it as a central part of the story. What I do care about is small town folks who start out by making basically very simple, small errors, and they're easy ones to make. You know.
And very often they're teenagers in your books, but you know, you taught high school for a lot of years, so you probably saw the potential for crime and disaster on our daily basis.
Indeed. You know, one of my friends calls convenient disposal my school book. Because convenient disposal starts with what was actually my last parent conference as a hearing officer for a student who was being kicked out of school. And first of all, the parent was absolutely astonished that because you carry a weapon to school, this was a long time ago, because you carry a weapon to school, you're expelled for the rest of the school year and forbidden to attend any school, any public school in the state of New Mexico. Well, that's probably the same in Arizona. So this, you know, here's a gifted honor student in 8th grade who has decided, you know, it's an easy error to make. I'm being bullied, so I'm going to carry a 6-inch hat pin in the inseam of my jeans. No one will ever see it. Oh, sure. And so the hearing was, you know, this is what's going to happen to you. Well, here's a gifted honor student, 8th grade, who will now be out of school for the rest of the school year, anywhere. She had this on her record, and you could tell that she ran her family, because at one point she asked her mother in the hearing, or excuse me, the mother said, "Can I see that?" referring to the hat pin. And the kid said, quote, "Will I get it back?" You know, absolutely no notion of how things work. So anyway, that, you know, as a writer, that's a nifty episode to use. And so that's why it still happens to be at school. You know, as the police officer during this hearing, for the kid carrying the hat pin, and finishes that hearing and goes outside to her car, and the principal at the next door, the elementary school, says, "By the way, can I talk to you for a minute? Do you know what your son in 1st grade is doing?" And you can imagine after this hearing, you know, Estelle's heart rate. You know, what is the little monster doing? And that's when she discovers that the kid is a musician.
Well, you can't really dispense a uniform justice on all of these different situations, too. I always find, you know, if the sheriff's department has to evaluate Gassner in particular, but more now Estelle, what is the appropriate, you know, justice to be served in these cases? And sometimes it's pretty draconian, but sometimes it's really not.
Yeah, and what the problem is, and police officers often forget this, I know, that they're not the ones who decide what justice is dispensed.
Right?
They can't be making up laws as they go based on their own philosophy and feelings. They're hired to enforce the laws that are on the book. Sometimes that's very hard for a young officer to do, especially a young officer who's 21 or 22, has zero experience, and you know, he may be going to 30 domestic disputes a month and has no experience, no expertise in how to deal with these people. Wow.
So you have a background of journalism, teaching school, and then a serious photography sort of Jones that you wound up going around with police departments and so forth, you know, with camera technology, which is one reason Linda Riel is such an interesting character. So you brought an awful lot, you know, to your novels from your own personal experience.
Yeah.
Why did you start writing them?
Why?
Yeah.
I'd done 4 westerns.
No, why did you start writing at all? Sorry, forget about the westerns.
Start writing anything?
Yeah.
Well, I've always written or told stories from the time I was a little ankle biter. Not always true, which is, you know, how I got into fiction. I love storytelling. Storytelling, as most of these people around will tell you, is a disease.
Yeah.
I mean, you do stories, and it's an easy thing for a natural storyteller to do. to weave stories. It's also a fun process. I don't outline, I start with page 1 on the word processor and go. And it's fun to sort of write myself into a corner and find a graceful way to get out of it. That's just plain fun. And I think the whole writing process of storytelling is fun. I wouldn't do it if it wasn't.
Okay. Anybody have questions that they would like to ask you?
Do you play the piano yourself?
Well, sort of.
Okay.
I wish I could say I, play as well as Francisco does. Not even a chance. I have very slow fingers. But I know enough about piano and I listen to it enough. And thanks to Robert Greenberg from the Great Courses, once you've listened to Robert's 32 piano sonatas of Beethoven and waded through that whole course, you pick up quite a bit. And I listened to it with Francisco in mind, because that was one of the challenges in not being a pianist. I had to work hard at it. Was when he gives his concert in Posadas, he comes to the high school and does the concert, and figure out what he was going to play. Now the fictitious stuff he plays, that's easy because it's fictitious. But when you say that, okay, he's going to be playing at age 15, he's going to be playing the Appassionata Sonata, you really have to know what the Appassionata Sonata sounds like, because you have to know what's going on with the audience. And I thought, that would be a neat scene if the killer was in the audience.
You also have to ask if his hands were big enough for some pieces. I mean, he couldn't really play pictures at an exhibition, for example. Sladislav Richter could hardly manage the chords, so it'd be hard for a 15-year-old kid to do it.
But his hands are pretty big. He takes after his dad, who's an injured surgeon. But we have it's getting more detail than you want to hear, but we got a neat series of discs with Daniel Barenboim playing all kinds of stuff, Beethoven and Mozart and so on. Barenboim's hands are fairly small.
He's actually quite small. He's my size.
He's not a big guy. And I've watched some of his master classes, one of which when he's giving a master's class and one of the students is Lang Lang, the Chinese fire pianist, loud, fast. And, that's where the stuff for the book comes from, is watching things like that. I don't need to be able to play the Appassionata much as I'd like to.
Anybody else? No? Well, anybody from the press have questions they would like to ask?
Yes.
I was wondering why and when you started your medical books.
Why I started it?
Yeah, what interested you about it?
That's a good question. For whatever reason, for a long 30 or 35 years, I've been collecting old medical texts. And oddly enough, I read them. It's just a hobby of mine. And I think the reason I did that was because I imagined that someday I was going to write a medically based book. And I couldn't figure out how to do it. I tried a couple times. My then agent said, no. How do we do this? And it took a long time to actually get a story that would work. And it took some learning about storytelling. That, the history of anthrax, for instance, or the history of any of the biggie diseases, cholera, which is comes a time for burning, is a nasty disease.
Awful.
But the book can't be a history of cholera. It's a fictitious novel about a young doctor and the problems he's having dealing with it. So you have to remember that when you're doing the research. It's terribly easy to get stuck in the tar pit of research. I've known lots of folks at the various writing conferences I give that confess they've been doing research for years. I said, why? you know, if you're writing a history of medicine, that's one thing. But if you're just writing a story, all you need to know is what the doctor is doing in that particular paragraph and make sure it's correct. So when I finally figured that out, I figured out how to do it to cut down my research time. And the easy answer to that was something as a fictitious thing where I said, okay, he graduates from the University of Pennsylvania in 1891. Who was on the faculty at the University of Pennsylvania? So I looked through and, okay, there's Dr. Roberts. I forgot his first name, but he was a professor of anatomy and so on. And I have his medical text that he wrote. Well, it's logical that Dr. Roberts would have been one of this young physician's professors. So, what's the point of all that? Well, there's a scene that starts that book with him setting a spiral fracture of the thumb of a young logger.
It does a logger.
Yeah, and he says, how'd you do this? Well, I used thumb wrestling. Oops. Well, there's a scene in there where he's 26 years old. He's never fixed a spiral fracture in anything. How would he know? So he's looking in Roberts' textbook of internal medicine at a engraving of the bones of the hand. Trying to figure, okay, this is what they should look like, and this is what I got to do. And that's how you do the research, to limit, so that you don't spend months and months and months researching how a bone was set. You don't need to know. You need to know enough to get through that scene.
Mm-hmm. Anyone else? Oh,
Anything you
it's a
always want?
quiet crowd tonight. Well, guys. Oh. Well, I would like to say that I think that those of you who like Western crime fiction, there are two authors, as you know, three actually, write about Wyoming. Margaret Cole, who's temporarily on hiatus with the Wind River Reservation. I don't know if she'll go back to it or not. And Craig Johnson and C.J. Box. And in New Mexico, we've had Michael McGarty, and I just got an email from Michael saying he was going to write another Kevin Carney, and it would be out in next year. So I'm really pleased about that. He stopped writing them for a bit.
Yeah, we haven't seen him.
And, over in Vermont, we have Archer Mayer, who has written umpteen police procedurals, wonderful books. I love them, set in Vermont. And for a long time, John Sanford was Minnesota and moved all around. It's an interesting thing, I think, to pick a state and then, possibly almost always where you actually live. So otherwise you don't have to do a lot of traveling. And then, you can sort of depict the entire state and all, but I think, nobody else is really writing about the boot heel or the southern part of New Mexico. Some people have written about Texas and along the Rio Grande, but haven't lasted very long. But I think it's remarkable that you've taken this, very small place and made it so real and sustained it for so long.
A lot of violent people there.
Well, I think border communities are actually inherently more interesting. Kent Kruger and I have talked about that because in his books, the border's Canada. And, there's a constant sort of toing or froing. When Peter Bowen wrote his books about Montana, he was forever having to deal with the is it the Cree? Can't remember. Was it the Cree? Going back and forth across the Canadian, because the indigenous people borders weren't part of their life. It was all different, a whole different deal. But I think any border community has more conflict. It has more mix of characters. You've got various cultures competing. You write about the church in Tres Santos. And you assume that most of this community is Catholic, but not all of it.
Sure.
So I think you picked a spot that can remain interesting, even though it is so small.
Yeah, we have time for one story. I'll tell you that, as not directly in the books, but you'll see where it ties in. When I was teaching at Ruidoso, I switched from high school to teaching middle school. One of the things that the student council of Ruidoso Middle School did was take a busload of presents and food and everything else to the Palomas Middle School in Palomas, Mexico. And if you've never been there, it's right across the border from Columbus. And this was going to be kind of fun to go. And our principal was Sergio Castañon, who was, perfectly fluent in Spanish. We had our school had an extra big copier that they were going to give at the Paloma School. With a whole bunch of paper, and a whole bunch of toner, and all this good stuff. And bags of groceries and gifts, and put on a Christmas party for the little kids at Palomas. And we pulled up to the border crossing, which is, a nice U.S. building, at least at this time it was, on our side, and another concrete building on the Mexican side with barbed wire in between. And our guys didn't care that we were going into Mexico, obviously. It's just Mexico was caring. And the officer came out to the bus, shaking his head. You can't take that bus into Mexico. Why ever not? Been doing this for years. Well, because the auditors are here from Mexico City. And we have to do everything absolutely according to the law. So, what are we going to do? He said, well, you can walk across. That's fine. Well, fortunately, the school is, here we are on the bus, building the fence. The school is right there on the other side of the fence. In fact, the fence is almost against the gymnasium, the half-finished gymnasium. So here are all these, ruidoso 8th graders, each one of them carrying a big sack of goodies, food, gifts, what have you. And it was raining. Yeah. So they had insult to injury. Here they are, walking through the rain, through the gate, walking over to the high school. And they could just as easily just pulled the bus through the gate and parked it in front of the elementary school. Just nuts. Well, this left the problem of the copier. Here's this beautiful big Canon copier. Oh, you can't take that in there. Why not? Just that sort of unreasoning blockhead sort of approach to things. But that's, their laws, and that's what they do. And, I didn't know what to say. I didn't say anything because, it was the principal was the one who was doing the talking back and forth and trying to negotiate this visit. I thought it was kind of funny that when he told the driver of the bus to turn the bus around and get it out of his face, she drove over one of his flower beds. The big bus parked over in the U.S. parking lot, across the little road from the U.S. facility. So, but, things like that you can work, not the actual visit, but the sort of attitude. When Estelle's great uncle Ruben has to cross the border, he works down in Tres Santos a lot. They never stop him because they know. And it's the old wheelbarrow joke, the guys every day goes through the customs border crossing with a wheelbarrow loaded full of stuff, and they're trying to find out what he's smuggling. And they search it, and it's just dirt. And let him go. And it's only years later that they find out he was smuggling wheelbarrows.
Well, anyway, the good news is there are going to be more books, right? So,
Yeah.
Unfortunately, thank you, Miles, very much for doing that, by the way. I will let you finish.